The 1988 fantasy movie Willow is one of these movies that everyone seems to have a fond memory of, but only a few seem to actually remember what this movie was all about. With a new TV show on Disney Plus continuing the story, I guess it was time to just revisit the original and find out if it stood the test of time, and if it was even great to begin with. If you want to find out my take on this, then join me for this short review video. So here is the synopsis in a nutshell. A prophecy is foretelling the downfall of evil queen and sorceress Mavmorda, to be brought on by a child with a specific birthmark. So of course the queen has every newborn checked for that birthmark, hunting down her potential future enemy. However, that little kid named Elora Danon was saved by her midwife before she could be captured by the evil queen's minions. After being on the run with the newborn child for a few weeks, she was found and cornered near a river, and so to continue the Moses theme, she placed the kid on a float and let her drift down the river to hopefully be found by someone who can take care of her. That someone turned out to be Willow and his family. Like everyone else who lives downriver, Willow is an elven, which here means he is a dwarf like everyone else in his village. While everyone living upstream is called a daikini, which means a tall person. Though Willow was quite reluctant to take the kid in.
Oh, she's so cute. Can't we keep it, Dada?
No. We'll push it downstream and forget we ever saw it.
His family completely embraced her from the get-go, so surely he soon also falls in line, adoring the little one. However, as the queen has sent out an army led by her daughter Sorsha and the masked general Kael to hunt down the baby, that of course puts Willow, his family and the whole village into jeopardy. Willow, who is an aspiring wizard, is then sent on a quest by their actual wizard, who he hopes will someday become his teacher, to make sure the girl is brought to safety, which after other people interfere, prolonging the quest a little bit, turned out to be further away than initially expected. On that quest, of course, Willow will meet a lot of people to make friends with, and also finds out a lot about himself and his potential of being a wizard. Like I said in the beginning, Willow is one of these movies that everyone seems to have developed fond memories of, but nobody really seems to actually remember what was going on when they watched it back in the day. Of course, this movie also has a little cult following, and those people know the movie pretty well, but I assume many people like myself have only watched it once when it came out and never revisited since. But in our brains, also I guess due to the reporting on it, which turned it into a cult movie, it might have built up a reputation that developed more in our heads than being based on actual qualities of the movie. But let's have a look at that. I remember that I wanted to watch this movie in the theater, but the theatrical run was quite short, for which I guess the reason is that the movie just wasn't that successful initially. Originally considered a box office bomb, it really just broke even due to international sales, and eventually even made a plus due to VHS sales, which were going quite well. And this is where I first watched the movie back in 1988, or maybe 1989, depending on when it was released on VHS. Looking back, there were only a few things I remembered from that movie, where the first one was that the acting was quite well and the interactions between characters was quite entertaining, especially between Matt Mordigan, played by Val Kilmer, and Willow, played by Warwick Davis. I also remember that since then Warwick Davis was a household name, and whenever I read that name, it was worth a look. The other thing I remembered from that movie though was that I was quite underwhelmed with the special effects. Especially with one scene where you had like a two-headed monster fighting our heroes at a castle. I remember that really looked quite cheap and that you could even see the contours of the creature, showing you how it was copied into the movie, at least in some places. And I even misremembered that I thought that was the queen, but it turned out to be just a troll who was mutating. So you can see from back then I did not really remember very much. So it was good that I rewatched the movie first before going into the series. But let's stay with these two things for now. After rewatching the movie I can say that the acting is still holding up and I really like the characters and how they are played. Especially the introduction of Val Kilmer's Matt Mordigan, who we first meet sitting in a cage on a roadside, being punished for some things he did, likely theft, left there to rot, until he is then saved by Willow, who he talks into letting him go free. Also, the chemistry between Val Kilmer and Joanne Valley is quite obvious, which I guess nobody was surprised to find out later on that they were also turned out to be a real-life couple after the movie. And later on married, but also are already divorced since. However, you really could see that there is a spark between the two of them. Everyone else in this movie also seemed to have quite a lot of fun playing their roles, so nothing to complain here. The special effects, I have to say, were really partially as bad as I remembered, especially in that sequence that I described with that two-headed monster. Although some of these scenes were actually quite well done. But for some it was still true that you could really see how it was copied in. I guess back in the day when I watched it on VHS, as you know, movies filmed in CinemaScope were usually just panned and scanned, so they zoomed in and everything was just blown up. So those effects that were not convincing on the big screen to begin with, of course, looked even more suspicious and cheap on the small screen when you zoom in onto them. However, what I completely forgot was that there was also a race of even smaller characters called the Brownies, who were just like 10 inches tall, if even. And those were meant to be the comic relief of the movie, which partially worked quite well, especially since one of them was one of the first larger roles of Kevin Pollak, who you might know from a lot of other movies, as well as Rick Overton, who I personally are not that well acquainted with, but they both are doing a fair job on playing their parts.
Oh, you fool! He does not need to know everything!
I didn't tell him everything.
You told him enough!
What did I say?
Although a lot of the jokes also are quite infantile and just not hit the mark. But overall, they were quite fun to watch.
Here!
But what I wanted to talk about there was how they were put into the movie. And of course, as they were so small, but still were played by actors of regular height, they had to be also copied in. Sometimes it looked okay, sometimes it looked a little bit cheap, and sometimes really, again, like with the other creature, you could really see the contours where they were cut out of the original material and copied into the movie. So there the effects were actually cheaper than I remembered, which overall was quite a weak point for this movie, but if you like fantasy movies, you could still live with that. By the way, there were also some effect scenes where Willow meets a sorceress that is turned into an animal and he tries to bring her back to her human form. And that was done with a lot of morphing effects, where in most cases she just ends up being a different animal after he tried to change her back. And that was back then when morphing effects were still quite new, so it was a pioneer in that regards, and those effects still look kinda okay. But again, overall, the special effects in that movie, even though they were praised back in the day, were not really convincing even back then. Especially the way they were copied into the actual movie. Which is a pity, because even the creature effects with the two-headed monster was done with stop and sometimes go motion. So it was handcrafted and it was not a computer effect, which back then would have looked really cheap. But the way they integrated it into the movie was just sloppy. But enough about that. Because talking of sloppy, what was really sloppy was the screenplay. And that is true from start to finish. Let me quickly take you through the most annoying and enraging things about the screenplay. First off, as you might have seen, the main story plotline is pretty much a rip-off of the Moses story, even including the river where the child is drifting down. That alone is not that bad, but there's really not much explanation giving for anything that is happening in this movie, starting with why this queen is considered to be that evil. You just see a text scrolling at the beginning where it tells you that there is an evil queen and she just learned about a prophecy about a child that's about to be born, and that's about it. There's no character development or backstory about the queen. There is no backstory about basically any character in this movie, not even the main ones that we are joining. You only know that Willow is a young father, which would here be enough. You don't learn much about the background of Matt Mardigan, except for that he seems to be a scoundrel before he met Willow and bettered his life since then, but also don't really learn much about him. And the lack of backstory was also quite interesting in the character of Kale, who was introduced with a weird skeleton mask, which I guess was supposed to be something as iconic as Darth Vader or something along those lines, but never really had any big meaning for the movie. He was just a general, and that's about it. Some other characters just felt like being thrown in, especially some who seemed to have some kind of a Deus Ex Machina function. Like a scene where a magical creature within the forest is not only helping Willow but also tell him a lot of stuff that he needs to do.
Elora Danan has chosen you to be her guardian.
Me?
Yes, she likes you.
which felt like just a checkpoint in an adventure game where they tell you what to do next, where his quest has to continue. She has no function other than that. She wasn't mentioned before, she was not mentioned ever after. She only gives him some clues and a magic wand that he can use if he needs it, but was supposed to hand over to the sorceress that he later meets and that turns out to be turned into an animal, like I mentioned before. The whole race of brownies has no explanation as to what they are doing and why they are joining him, because it's also just a mean to bring in some comic relief, which I guess is somehow legitimate but also quite lazy doing it this way. And then there is the fact that the love story that they just thrown into the movie as well. Even though, like I said before, the chemistry between Joanne Valley and Val Kilmer is quite nice, it also doesn't make much sense, because Saoirse is the daughter of the evil queen, again with no backstory as why she is also evil, why she is helping her mother. You don't know anything about her. But the only thing that is relevant is that, under a spell, Val Kilmer's character is just proclaiming his love for her, and that is enough to just turn her, because she just needed a kiss and that's it. I guess the movie will tell us that people are just mean and evil because they are not loved, which is quite an oversimplification. And also love, I guess, is not working that way, that you just need to be kissed once and then you are in love, but hey, it's a movie. Yet still it felt very forced and not really believable. And also from a politically correctness standpoint, I would say it also really belittles women. Because when you look at it from a female standpoint, then it's even worse that you say, okay, you just need a man who kisses you and then everything is fine and then you will follow him wherever he goes. That should not fly today anymore, but as you know, this movie is a product of the 80s, where it was even a surprise already that you had a strong woman to begin with, even though she was then turned quite easily to the other side. But women in movies in that time were mainly depicted as damsels in distress, so I guess we should not complain too much here. It also never really becomes that clear why the evil queen is not just trying to straight out kill the little girl, but instead wants to have her brought back to the castle so that she can perform a ritual, which apparently is supposed to bring her into another dimension and strand her there. Something I think they called the 13th night or something like that. There was some mentioning about rebirth and stuff like that, so I guess if she would have killed her, she might have just been reborn and then the prophecy would renew itself, so she was trying to basically ban her into another realm. But yet again, there were not very much clear and straightforward explanations for that. And also, in a Deus Ex Machina moment, just in the second where she was about to kill one of our lead characters, she was struck by lightning and dissolved. Which I guess pretty much was supposed to mean that she is now going to that place where she wanted to banish the girl to. Which of course is needed because the story in the new Disney Plus show will need to be continued, and though I haven't watched it yet, the actress playing the queen is also mentioned there in the cast, so I assume she will be brought back from there, but we will find out later. But again, it was just a very lazy thing from the screenplay to end the movie like that. And another quick call out regarding the fact that they introduced trolls to that movie, which were teased on in the movie quite a lot because Willow was afraid so much of trolls.
Trolls that'll skin you alive and take your face off?
Rhiannon, you know I hate trolls.
And then you see the guys and they are just looking very stupid. They are basically the same size as people. They look a little bit like gorillas or something, just crawling around. The only feature they have is basically having the ability to walk around on walls like spiders, but that's it. And their special makeup really was cheap as hell, so they were a really big letdown. And also didn't further the movie at all. They were actually at the end of the day just used to introduce another monster that was just a mutation that came out of one of the trolls, which ended up to be the two-headed beast I talked about earlier, which was so poorly copied into the movie. And they could have explained that in a different way without any trolls. Which basically sums it up, you know, because the screenplay appeared to be a lot of ideas and elements that were thrown together but never really connected that well. Which obviously gave the movie a little bit of a disconnected feeling and took away a lot of the impact that it could have had.
Mother! Traitor child. I must despise you now.
With all that being said, let's get into the rating. But before we go there, let me ask you to like and share this video if you enjoyed it so far. And if you are no subscriber yet, maybe consider to change that. By also hitting the notification bell, you will get a heads up for most of my new videos. Now for the rating. Now, rating this one is quite a task, because it is by no stretch of the imagination a great movie. But it also is not bad at all. The tricky thing is that it really comes with a lot of 80s nostalgia and with a lot of memories in your head that made you kind of fondly remember it, even though you know that the story was not that well written and that the effects were subpar. But still there were some things that made this movie interesting.
You are great.
I mean, I can say after rewatching the movie, I'm pretty sure now I understand why it never became a cult classic in my book and why it is not a movie I keep rewatching over and over again. But I also can see why people might be attracted by it, because it has quite a nice 80s quality and some kind of an innocence that might attract repeat viewing. I, for my part, consider it to be a solid movie, though it is not a great one. But it also is not as bad as critics back in the 80s were making it out to be. However, it had a lot of potential that was wasted, and it could have been much better than it actually is. I guess partially one was quite underwhelmed because this movie was produced by George Lucas, and back then he was basically the benchmark of special effects. So in his movies you expected a little bit more than from the rest of the bunch. And also looking back, knowing that it was one of Ron Howard's first movies that he directed, and knowing how great a director he became since then, of course there were some higher expectations as well. Which also seems to be not that fair, because back then he was just starting out. So where does that leave us? I guess to say that it was a nice movie that was entertaining is okay for sure, so it should be at least 6 points. I do not think that I really can say it was a good movie, because it had too many flaws to reach that point. But through the lens of 80s nostalgia, I'm willing to go there saying let's go for a 7 out of 10 points. Which of course seems to be quite low, especially considering that this movie is considered by many people as a cult movie, but I can only rate it as I see it, and that should be fine and fair. But as you know, that's always the point with a movie that is considered to have cult status. There are also movies that I love to death and that I would rate much higher than mostly everyone else would, but that's just part of a game, and that's why there are different voices when it comes to rating movies. And at least I can say I was trying to be as fair as possible with this one. What do you think? Do you agree with my rating, or are you one of those who consider this a cult movie? If so, let me know what exactly it is that you love so much about this movie that you are willing to rate it much higher than I just did. If you think I was too gracious rating it, also let me know in the comments why you think that is, and share your opinion on how you would have rated it. With that all being said, I'm curious in how the TV show will turn out, and if it is a straight out continuation, which it seems to be because most of the cast is returning, including Joanne Whalley and Jane Marsh as Saoirse and the Evil Queen, respectively. And even the brownies are returning, and of course Willow is back, which should be a given since the title of the show is still Willow. Curious to see how they will address the absence of Val Kilmer, who of course, as you know, has currently some health issues and is going through a lot. But from what I heard, they at least leave the door open so he might be able to return in a future season if there is one, because luckily, as we hear, his condition seems to be getting better and better. So fingers crossed and good health to him. And now I will go on and check out the show and let you know in another video how that one went. So much for now, see you next time and thanks for watching!